Hello, everyone. This is Jessica Pettitt, and who do I have the privilege of interviewing today?
Becky Curran.
Hi, I'm so glad we're getting able to connect. How
Yes.
how have you been, and how did you come to doing this work?
I've been really passionate about this work my whole life, but wanted to make sure that I gained credibility, proving myself in the work environment before really voicing what I was passionate about. So I started as a marketing major in college and started pursuing marketing, and then ended up in the entertainment industry working behind the scenes because I knew that it could influence change in the industry, because what we see in the media influences how people are treated in society. And as a little person myself, I'm treated in a positive way if someone sees someone in a positive light in media, or in a negative way if someone sees someone in a negative light in media. And I continue to work in marketing within the entertainment industry. But as I continued to prove myself, it was clear that I was passionate about being more specific about making change when it comes to diversity, and more specifically disability, because that is the one group that is often left out of the diversity conversation.
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad to have you. So, are you ready to start with two open-ended questions?
Of course.
So these are ideas that are just rolling around in my head. There's no correct answers, and I'm really curious with your experiences what your take of them on them are. So the first one is the concept of diversity dividend. So this usually comes up when people are talking about return on investment or something for DI kind of trainings. So thinking about investment, action, and return, what does diversity dividend mean to you?
I think it's a valid question, thinking in a valid point that people are always thinking about, are we going to make money off of this if we invest in being more inclusive? I think it's true that we need evidence. We continue to need evidence and research to prove that it does benefit the bottom line. We actually did research recently with Accenture, and it proved that those companies who are more inclusive of people with disabilities actually do have a higher return on investment, higher bottom line. They are just more successful in general because they're being all encompassing and inclusive. But no one's going to pay attention until you get to that point where you can prove that it does help the bottom line. And similar to my work in the entertainment industry, when we would try to advocate for all areas of diversity being included, it was always about, well, it's easier for us to just have a name actor play an actor who is in a wheelchair rather than an actual authentic wheelchair user who doesn't have a name for themselves at this point. But even those name actors had to have started somewhere. They weren't just a name to begin with, unless maybe they were a family member of a large family full of actors. It's important to have a chance to be able to start somewhere and then continue to prove that you do benefit the organization and the value you bring.
Right.
Another thing is, with people with disabilities, you just think when they're waking up in the morning, there are so many tasks they have to do before even getting out of the house. I always share the example of, I have to make sure there's a step stool next to my bed in order to make sure I don't fall off the bed when I'm trying to get up. I have to go to the bathroom and make sure I can reach the sink. And this is more easier for me to do in a home environment, but when it comes to being at hotel rooms or other places, I have to worry about, is the toilet seat loose? If I'm trying to climb up to go to the bathroom, is it going to pinch me? There are things that happen just before I even get out of my room to go to the bathroom to then go figure out what's for breakfast, where I'm not going to talk about those things on a daily basis, but they're skills that I've been able to contribute or bring to the workplace.
Mhm.
Is when it comes to problem solving and making accommodations, or going in a different direction if the original plan didn't work out. I would say that people who are in all areas of diversity are used to detours and trying to figure out a different way to get to where they want to go. Even if it's a different way, you're still on your way to that place.
Yeah. The detours thing might be, it's a good segue to kind of the other big open-ended question, and that's about other duties assigned. So typically this shows up as like the last line on a job description or something, and it's kind of a catch-all for all the things you don't even get paid or recognized for, let alone you talk about like the struggles one has to do to even show up. But can you talk a little bit about the concept of other duties assigned and what that means when we're talking about people who either have marginalized or subordinated identities, or possibly from the people who don't?
I think those things need to be talked about more often, the other duties assigned, because that's usually where there are some problems, especially with the disability community, where it may say, oh, by the way, you're going to have to lift 50-pound boxes on a daily basis. It's important to really evaluate those from the job recruiter side to make sure those are really duties that someone has to do, or the person next to them couldn't just do it, where it could be a potential barrier. And I think, as you said, the other duties assigned, to an extent, I think they should almost be a part of the job description, so someone isn't thinking that this is all this other work that they have to do without getting paid. I think it's important to frame it in a way that, yes, this is part of your job, but it's all part of the salary you make, rather than saying you have to do all these extra things. But it's also important for the potential employee to challenge those things and make sure that those are really things that they can do and want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think sometimes it may have to do with a passion project that aligns with what they may want to do. I know a lot of times companies have employee resource groups. Unless you work in the diversity and inclusion department, it's not necessarily part of your job. So it is one of those volunteer things, but a lot of times people have a passion for it, whether or not they identify as having a disability or any area of diversity, or consider themselves an ally, because it's important for us to have just as many allies as people with disabilities in those groups or areas of diversity.
Mm-hmm. Just to give credit to all stars, even those starting out, we have a cameo from a pupper, I believe, behind you. Who's the little pupper behind you?
That is Saeed. He is a pug and beagle mix.
Hi, Saeed. Nice to meet you. My pug lab is asleep snoring behind me, so there may be a common mixed pug situation happening. I just wanted to let us know.
If
Leo
they
says,
end up talking, then he's going to get very excited.
I know, same thing. Like Leo will wake up and be like, what's going on? So I just like to give credit where credit's due. Thank you very much for joining us. We talked a little bit before we hit record about your diverse background, no pun intended. Can you talk a little bit about, as a little person, what kind of work you're doing around disability, around inclusion? I know you also worked around casting, other situations. Like, what are people, in a couple minutes, what are people not aware of that you need to be constantly like, hello, this is what's going on?
Right. So when I graduated from Providence College in Rhode Island, I was supposed to be a stand-in for Peter Dinklage in the movie Underdog, because it was filming in Providence that summer, and I had networked and made connections with the casting director. I didn't really think that was the route of my career, but it was something that would give me a good amount of money for the summer, and it would be a great experience. Unfortunately, it conflicted with my last 2 weeks of college, so I had to turn down that opportunity, but I still asked if I could help out with the casting process. So make sure that I was helping get people to set, especially when it came to extras. Sometimes it would be 300 a day. You needed to call and make sure they show up. And it was crazy, especially a place like Providence, Rhode Island, where they don't film as often as Los Angeles or New York. People would cancel life-threatening doctor's appointments just to be on set, because it was such a glamorous experience. And through that experience, I learned a bit about the casting process. I had an opportunity to move from Boston to Los Angeles to work for a talent manager who also happens to be a little person. Unfortunately, I have yet to meet her to this day.
Oh, wow.
The minute I got out to LA, she said something came up and it wasn't going to work out. My parents had said, you need a place to stay and a job in order for us to support you moving out there. We were out there moving out, getting settled, and that's when I found out that it fell apart. Of course, they could have said, then just come home with us. But they knew I wanted to give it a try. I had done some networking, did some outreach to alumni from Providence College who happened to live in Los Angeles, tried to meet as many people as possible, would drive around town. I ended up sending out 1,000 resumes, and then I went on 100 interviews.
Wow, that's a book in itself.
Every single one of them down. So it really did happen. And
Wow.
every time I walked in the door, I was judged based on my appearance. And I think it was just fear of the unknown, people not coming across a little person. I wasn't even getting the constructive feedback. They could have told me that I sucked at interviewing, and I would try to figure out how to fix it. But I didn't even get that feedback. I was just getting the negative body language, the frozen look, like, we don't know what to do with you look.
Mm-hmm.
What I ended up doing is going through temporary placement agencies. I interviewed with them, then they could just place me somewhere, and I would show up to a job and someone couldn't send me home just because of my appearance in that case. I did a month at the Hallmark Channel, and then a few weeks later, I ended up working at Creative Artists Agency. And when I started there, I ended up being a temp for 7 months. So even within that, proving myself, I was constantly told, like, just stay patient, it'll happen. Then finally, I got 2 bosses. I was working for 1 agent and then ended up working for 2, and that's when they hired me on full time, and I ended up being there for 5 years total. I learned probably halfway through that I just didn't want to be a talent agent, but I still wanted to figure out how to change what we see in the media. One of the partners asked me what I was passionate about and supported me hosting a panel discussion at the agency. And this was in October 2011. And it was people with disabilities who are on screen and behind the scenes. And we had about 160 people from the industry come and watch the panel discussion. And then that really kind of started a movement where I started a Facebook and Twitter page called Disability in Media. Now, the Twitter page has like 18,000 followers. And it's just, I think people just like the word media, but I'm constantly trying to share stories that people wouldn't normally see, people like them doing things, so then they know that there's more that's possible, because a lot of people don't see themselves doing things, and that's why the media's influence is so important. And I continue to keep that up, just sharing articles. But through that process, I was recruited to work at CBS television studios and casting, and I was there for a year. And I learned that quickly after I got there that the writers, directors, producers aren't as communicative with each other, where if something says we need a doctor with glasses, they're not going to think to look for a doctor of color, a doctor with a disability. They're just going to specifically look at what the description says. And it was important for me to constantly advocate for those people who were in the panel discussion and people I continue to get to know who have a lot of great talent. And after about a year, it just didn't seem like the right fit. And I decided that I was going to leave Los Angeles. Unfortunately, around that time, my best friend was diagnosed with ALS. And he was also the person who was my roommate, who told me I always need to dress as my best self. He needed to move back to where he was from in Roswell, Georgia, near Atlanta. And I decided to move back to Boston. I knew that I couldn't physically take care of him, even though I was tempted at that point just to give up everything and take care of him. But I needed to really figure out what was the next step in my career, since that industry kind of bogged me down, and I just needed to figure out what was next. And my family loves me unconditionally. They welcome me back home with open arms. I dealt with a lot of stigmas that I put on myself, because I thought, okay, now I'm an adult with a disability living at home after being independent for so long. What am I doing with my life? But I also had to deal with the whole thought process of it took me so long to get a job in the first place, and now I'm starting over. And around that time, as I was overthinking everything, my sister, who's a creative writing teacher, asked me if I could come meet her students, because she always talked about me. And what I ended up doing, instead of just going to hang out with her students, I started sharing my story. At first, I was also putting the stigma on myself of, I haven't reached a certain level of success, so no one's going to want to hear my story. But then soon after I got over that, people actually wanted to hear my story. I went to some parent meetings of parents of little people. They were talking about the bullying that's happening in schools. I decided that I could go in and educate the educators and then speak to the whole student body in those schools, especially if someone's transitioning from elementary school to middle school, because there's a smaller population and now they're getting to know a larger population, new people in the middle school. I would try to help with that transition and continue to try to do that where there's a need. And even some people who were put in a special education school that didn't necessarily need to be there, convincing the educators that they can go on a different path. And I think it just helps by sharing my story. It can help others understand what's possible, because I didn't have any special plans other than I did have untimed tests just because I have shorter arms. It took a little longer to write, and then some stools in the bathrooms. And I had major back surgery in 10th grade. So I had a set of books in my classroom and at home, so I wouldn't have to carry them back and forth. But there wasn't much more than that I required. And I think it's important for people to just ask the person, what are the accommodations they need? What are reasonable accommodations? And I continued to do that for about a year and a half and continued to do speaking, but it got lonely and I wanted to figure out how to supplement it, have something else to do, get out of the house. I was offered a job at the Actors Union, SAG-AFTRA in New York. I moved from Boston to New York. This was in April 2014, and I was able to do speaking alongside my work there, advocating on behalf of all the diversity committees that are represented there and trying to promote greater levels of inclusion in all areas of diversity, making sure there are more authentic portrayals. If not authentic portrayals, authentic storytelling. And I connected the most with the Performers with Disabilities Committee and got frustrated that there's still a lot of work to do. And then a few years later, I ended up going to a conference for the organization that I work for now called Disability In. And these are corporations that come together and share best practices on how to be more inclusive. And one of the most amazing things about it is these corporations could be direct competitors. They share best practices with each other, but they still secretly want to do better than each other. But it's awesome to see that momentum and see the great work that's being done, because these companies actually want to do it, whether or not they have a connection to disability or it's just something that they're really truly passionate about. And most of these people sit in a diversity role, and their disability is just a part of the diversity role, but it's a huge thing for it even to be part of the diversity role, because for so long we've had these conversations where it's people of color and women, and we're not thinking about those other areas of diversity.
Right.
And that's why the work is really important. There's a lot of work that still needs to be done, but it's not an image face thing anymore in this corporate setting. It's more of who's going to do the job well. And especially now that we've done this research where we've been able to prove that it helps companies if they're more inclusive, it's important to continue to think of disability as a good thing, not necessarily a bad thing. I think sometimes people put assumptions and stigmas on us just because they think that we're so bummed out and hate the world because of being left behind for so long. But we need to move forward and be open and communicative about anyone's fears or hesitations, but work on moving forward so we don't keep getting stuck on what happened in the past, and just move forward and learn from each other.
That's wonderful. Thank you for the work that you do. Are you ready for my two favorite questions?
Yes.
First one is, what is something that you've changed your mind about lately?
I guess that there are good people in the world, even if they don't come across as good people. I think, especially with the mental health epidemic becoming so much more common, I think there's just so much fear. People are just afraid to open up and share their story, but the more you make someone feel comfortable, the more they're willing to share their story.
That's
And I
true.
think it's crazy the amount of people, even people I used to work with in the industry and other places, who will reach out and share a story about whether it's an in-law or a relative or just wanting advice on different things. And I think the more those stories come to the surface, the more we can understand that we're all just human. And we just want to live our lives. And at the end of the day, we all are here for a short time. And it's
Yeah.
important to be kind to one another. And I think
That might be a good segue. What do you absolutely know? If one is what you changed your mind about, then what do you absolutely know?
I know that most people want what's best for other people and themselves. But if you don't work on yourself first, then you're not going to be able to help someone else figure out what's best.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I feel like I cut you off in your first answer, and I didn't mean to. When you're talking about changing your mind about how mental health shows up, and then it got to ultimately we can just be kind to one another, right? Like I thought that was where you were headed, and that the power of kindness and knowing who we are is important. So
Yeah, and I think, and that's why even that whole interview situation that I went through, if someone just thought to ask me, how's your day going before we jumped into the interview questions, it probably would have been a different dynamic. And then maybe at that point, they'd feel comfortable giving me feedback. You know what? You may not be the best fit for this job based on our conversation, but maybe you could go look at this, or just to be willing to be a mentor. I think more people are seeking out mentors, or just someone who can give them feedback that can help them do better. And I think we need to continue to expect people to show up and show up well and help them get better.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Are you ready for lightning round? Dun, 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 dun! Lightning round. So you picked 3 numbers for my icebreaker cards. I'll ask you the question and you answer just off top of your head as quickly as possible. The first one is an easy question, which is number 2. If you were given $1 million, how would you spend it? And what if you had to give it away?
If I were to give it away, I would probably give it to a school that would need the most amount of money to make sure they have the most positive education possible. A lot of times schools are focused on clown presentations, and as entertaining as they may not be educational and may not help people be better people. And I think if I were to use it, I would also use it for a similar thing where there are so many schools and places that tell me they have no money for speaking. And if I could do it all, I would want to show up everywhere and continue to spread the message of the importance of inclusion.
Number 22 is intermediate. What is something that has happened in your life that has defined who you are?
When I was 15, I lost the ability to walk, and it was due to spinal cord compression. And I had back surgery where 7 pieces of my lower vertebrae were taken out, and I missed 29 days of school. That was my biggest frustration, missing 29 days of school and falling behind in life. I fortunately was able to get back on track, and I think that has gotten me to stay on track and continue to obviously take care of myself, but make sure that I show up even better, because you never know what could happen tomorrow.
Yeah. Interestingly, I had a perfect attendance record until I got really sick my senior year in high school, and they kept drawing blood thinking I had mono or something, but it kept showing up negative for mono. And it was also embarrassing because it's not like I was kissing anybody, right? The kissing disease. So I kept drawing blood, and then finally an intern happened to notice that my iron count was really low. And for some reason, my body just wasn't absorbing iron anymore. So I started getting iron shots and I was all back to normal. But I missed like 6 weeks of school because I had no energy.
Yeah.
So you never know. You just never know.
Right.
Right. And then you actually did one from easy, intermediate, and then your last one is a deep question. So number 44, if you could tell your younger self something, what would it be? How would you share the information, and when would you do it?
Wow. As much as we want to hide behind letters and writing and computers, I would probably want to have the face-to-face conversation. And I think I would say, don't worry so much about what the world thinks. You can do whatever you want to do. Obviously, I say within reason, because you want to be responsible and make sure you continue to be kind. but don't let other people's opinions affect where you take your life. And I think I probably let that happen too much, even with the interview process, not even myself saying, just tell me what I did wrong. I know this is an awkward situation. I think even being able to stand up for myself more and being okay with it, because it's important.
Mm-hmm. I actually got asked this question yesterday or the day before doing a podcast. And I told myself it was what would you tell yourself as a 25-year-old is what it was. And I said, well, as a 25-year-old, I was still heavily drinking. So I've been sober for 15 years. So I said I would have to sidle up against myself, next to myself at a bar, because that's the only place I would have had free time anyway. And I just would have told myself that the anxiety and the depression and the worry and the stress and everything that I'm currently feeling actually will not go away. Just stop like trying to get it all out or like use it all up, and just recognize this is who you are, and maybe stop drinking. Excellent. Well, this has been wonderful. Thank you for the cameo of Saeed. Sorry about my dogs freaking out that people are in the driveway, or a cat. I think the last one was a cat. If people wanted to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
They can go to my website, beckymotivates.com, and then my email is beckymotivates@gmail.com, and on all of social media, similar handles.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.